Enterprise business analyst Bode Ososami joins me now from London to discuss this deal. Bode, good morning. Bode is joining me from London right now. We're connecting with him right now. And the big question right now is what's driving this colossal tie-up? So, Bode, can you hear me this morning? We're having some technical
Good morning, Dorothy. Yes, I can hear you. This is indeed quite a colossal tie-up. These are two huge banking dinosaurs, 150-year-old banks, but struggling. Only last month, Commerzbank revised most of its 2020 financial targets. The same thing, Christian Sewing, the CEO of Deutsche Bank, recently said that they were running out of time in achieving their revenue targets, although most of the issues that they had with regulatory fines and so on were behind them. But there are quite a few drivers here. The big one, of course, is the slowdown in the Eurozone economy. The ECB boss, Mario Draghi, recently said the growth in the Eurozone will come down to 1.1% from an earlier forecast of 1.7% in 2019. And of course, the dovish stance of ECB means we are still going to have very low interest rates for a while, and low interest rates is not helpful for banks. So the environment is tougher for banks. And if you also look at the context of trade wars, both banks being weak, and then of course the German environment is apparently overbanked, according to many analysts, and the general political turbulence we're seeing in Europe is giving a lot of concern, and many wonder whether these banks can survive all these issues. So this is an opportunity, particularly as they've run out of ideas to turn around these two big banks. And Germany cannot afford to have two big banks like this not able to come up again. So it's an opportunity. Nothing has been concluded. It's just the beginning, the official beginning of talks. And like Christian Sewing said, the CEO of Deutsche Bank, still many uncertainties, still many potential blockers, including the 30,000 potential job cuts, unions to deal with. So we're very far from seeing this deal concluded.
So we're very far from seeing this deal concluded. Why is this particular merger so controversial?
Well, the reason why you go into a merger, Duarte, is to achieve synergies. You want 1 + 1 to be equal to 3. And in this case, you have two weak banks, bringing them together. Can you get a strong bank out of that? And many analysts don't believe that is going to happen. So it will probably just result in a more complicated mess, particularly as you have more financial scrutiny, which typically happens when you are doing a merger. You need about 3 billion to 5 billion euros of combined synergies to make this work. And many doubt that this will happen, given the very stringent labor laws, strong unions that have very strong board representation, and of course the slow adoption of mobile banking and the disruption in the banking industry. Delivery of any gains will take time. So if the synergy is not strong, delivery is going to take time, and these banks already are intrinsically weak, then of course we are seeing a toxic mix that may just make matters worse. So a lot of questions still are being asked concerning how this will be financed, what the valuations would be. Commerzbank particularly has a valuation which is presently higher than the value of its assets and so on. So a lot of questions, and obviously the government backing this up is being questioned given the huge the labor cuts that are implied.
There are huge labor cuts that are implied. 30,000 jobs could be lost. Still, the German government says it's supporting the merger. Why?
Well, I think Angela Merkel and particularly the finance minister in Germany sees the banking industry, particularly these two big banks. Commerzbank is particularly focused on small and medium enterprises, and they push the exports sector. And as you know, the German economy is very dependent on this export market, the export industry, and they are hoping a strong national bank will be able to provide the stimulus that is needed to assist, particularly in these very tough times. So it's not the right time to be having a banking closed down or a banking disaster in terms of closures and so on. So it's really a case of, if you don't take those 30,000 cuts, the cuts could be much bigger. The impact on the slowdown in terms of exports on the economy will result in even higher cuts. So it's like this is the lesser damage would be any costs as a result of this merger. But there are other reasons. Germany has a 15% stake in Commerzbank. They're thinking of retaining that stake, and there is a search for a big European solution to compete with the big U.S. banks, and many say this is perhaps the answer to that. But given the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses of these banks, I tend to doubt that.
So you tend to doubt that. German unions are saying they're not backing the deal. What are the other blockers, and what are they saying at this point?
Well, like Christian Sewing said, as CEO of Deutsche Bank, nothing is sealed, nothing is tied up. The German unions are extremely powerful. They sit on the boards, and they can easily kill the deal. The obvious, like I said, they will be selling it to them, telling them things could be worse if they don't back this merger, and it's going to be a tough marriage. The other thing, of course, that could block it is the economics of the whole thing, the valuation, where the money is going to come from. There's talk that Deutsche Bank would need about 8 billion euros, and may be thinking of spinning off its asset management business to be able to finance this. There's also talk that Commerzbank is vulnerable, exposed heavily to Italian bonds, and the closer scrutiny that the merger will bring will expose some of these poor credits. And of course, if you begin to see that there are issues, particularly in the balance sheet of Commerzbank with respect to exposure to Italian bonds, the likelihood is that Deutsche Bank will back off at the last minute after this close due diligence is done. So there are many things that could still stop this. The unions, the financial implications, finding the money, the true state of Commerzbank's asset portfolio, particularly exposure to Italian bonds, and of course, the general appetite for these types of huge deals. At this time, there is a lot of apprehension, particularly with these two banks that have not been doing well. This may not just be the right types of banks to be coming together. You probably want a strong bank and a weaker bank. That could make some sense, but two weak banks going through tough restructuring, it sounds like trouble to me.
It sounds like trouble to you. So what are the next steps in these merger talks? Are we likely to see more mergers like this?
Well, my sense is there will be attempts at mergers, particularly because of the difficulties in the economy in the Eurozone, and with the trade wars, depending on how that also plays out. The last quarter of 2018 was especially tough for most banks. HSBC, when we saw the results, the last quarter showed that there already is beginning to have an impact as a result of less trade finance, less export-import activity. Now, in the next few months, I expect the negotiations will continue, particularly with regards to the size of the deal, how it's going to be financed, and the related issues like possibly selling off the DWS group. That's the asset management group that many have said may be needed to be sold off. And then, of course, you could also see the comprehensive due diligence being done, and that could present some ugly surprises in the process. So I think it's early. Clearly, it's now official. It was talked about in 2016, and it was aborted later because something went wrong. It's early to say it's still going to go through now, but at least it's now official that they're now talking. The government say they're backing it. So it has a lot going for it. We have to wait to see what happens as the comprehensive due diligence goes in full speed.
Thank you so much, Bode Ososami from London.